Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to go and have a sort of another look at Wormleighton Reservoir, because that is where we started this little series of videos about the canal crisis, and so that is a good place to go and have a look for an update. And the question we're going to be looking at today is, has the recent rain sort of brought the crisis to an end? Or what effect has it had if not? So before we go any further, let me be really clear, this is not a scientific overview, and in any case, reservoirs are not there to catch the rain and solve the crisis. Reservoirs are there to basically provide a buffer in times of little rain. So all we're really doing is using it as a rain gauge. And because we went there a few weeks ago and it was almost completely empty, it'll just be a useful measure of how much water has fallen, at least in this local canal system. In fact, as you will know, the main source of water for canals is obviously rain, but it's fed from rivers and from aquifers and from streams mostly, and also the water system is improved by back pumping. So at the bottom of some flights of locks, a good example will be Long Buckby. There is an enormous pump which pumps water back up the locks again. So actually the source of the canals filling up again is not reservoirs. Reservoirs are there to be filled up and keep a buffer in case of dry weather. Now, there's a really interesting document you can download from the Canal and River Trust website, which shows all of the reservoirs sort of grouped together into groups which feed particular chunks of the system and how empty they are. And it should be no surprise to anybody who has seen the closures that this particular reservoir we're going to, Wormleighton, is part of the Oxford and Grand Union group of reservoirs, and that's one of the areas which has been particularly badly affected. Other areas that have been badly affected include the sort of peak forest canal system, and that's at least partly because the reservoirs were relatively empty to begin with. There were some works that needed to be done, especially on the reservoir up in Whaley Bridge, which had suffered a near failure. Quick pause for me to cross the railway without my video on. There we go, railway crossing completed. Now, where was I? Oh yes, so some of the reservoirs were low to begin with because of either planned engineering works or issues which happened with them, a couple of years earlier. And that has particularly badly affected your peak forest canals and, Caldon Canal and so on, and also the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. Down here, there were some problems with some of the reservoirs, not the reservoirs themselves, the feeders into the canals, which were very blocked and needed to be unblocked, and there wasn't the money to do so. So that has not helped, although it has helped galvanise the powers that be, partly the Canal River Trust and partly the government, to actually realise that they do need to have the maintenance work done on them. And the good news is they have used this drought as an opportunity to do some of that work. So in any case, these reservoirs, if they are full again, and I don't know, we haven't been up there, but if they are full again, that doesn't mean the crisis is over. And the CRT have been very, very clear that, a few days of rain is definitely not going to end the crisis, but it will give us a sort of direction of flow, if you see what I mean, to see if the crisis is starting to be alleviated. Now, on the way here, I passed another reservoir, which is actually much more important. So Wormleighton is relatively high up, it's relatively small, and it only provides a small buffer. But on the document I found on the CRT's website, it says that these reservoirs, the Oxford and Grand Union reservoirs, are down to 26.8% capacity, which is the lowest recorded ever. So, if this is still empty, it could mean that the other reservoirs have been filling up and this one hasn't. So the reservoir, if you remember, is just over this bridge. We will go and have a look and we will see what effect, if any, the recent rain has had. Now, looking at the canal, it's actually not hugely low here. And again, that does not mean that everything is hunky-dory. It could just mean that the CRT have managed to contain some of the, some of the problem in relatively leak-free areas. So, walking up to the place where we were a couple of weeks ago, you can see that it is still dryish, but you can see that the last time we were here, we could only see water by turning to our extreme right, and you can see that it has filled up very slightly, enough for a shed load of ducks and geese to suddenly call it home. So I think this is a good metaphor. It's actually not a good measure, as I've said, but this is a good metaphor for where we are at the moment. It's better than it was, but it is distinctly far from perfect. Now, what I want to do, when I must admit to being slightly disingenuous in the last video, because Worm Leighton regularly empties itself, and it's there to do so. But had I gone to Boddington Reservoir last time, which is where we're going to go now, what you would have seen is a reservoir that still looks like it has plenty of water in it, which is less dramatic, but actually more serious, because whilst it looks like it has plenty of water in it, the water levels are much lower. It's very, very windy today, by the way, so if my audio is distorted, I can only apologise. I have got a dead cat filter on my microphone, but who knows how well it is working. Not me at the moment. I won't know until I get back to the boat and download this footage. Right, so update so far. Worm Leighton is sort of filling up, but is nowhere near full yet. So our next stop is Body Reservoir to see what that looks like. Let's go there. Okay, so here we are at Boddington Reservoir. It's going to be a lot windier, so again, apologies if the audio is dodge. But the thing about Boddington Reservoir is that it's much lower down the system than Worm Leighton, and it's much bigger. So it provides water to more of the canal, and it provides it lower down the system. So let's climb up and have a look at the levels and see. Well, there's water in the reservoir, but as you can see, it is a pretty low level. So let's have a little walk around and discuss what it is the Canal and River Trust should do now. You see, we can clearly see at this area at least that the water level is starting to recover, which is by no means anywhere close to being recovered. And that picture has been repeated all over the system. So the first thing that people, especially boaters, have a tendency to say, and it's really, really understandable why they do, is we should fix all of the leaky locks. And I totally get it, I really do. It seems obvious, doesn't it? But, you know, leaky locks equals water leaking, equals water not retained in the system, and therefore solving leaky locks will solve the water retention problem. And in some places, that's true. And in quite a lot of places, that isn't true. Let me give you an example. Down on this very canal at Ano, there is a place where the River Cherwell flows into the canal and then a little bit later flows out again. So it adds water into the canal at times of low water in the canal, and it takes water out of the canal at times of high water in the canal. Now, upstream of that, therefore, it pretty much doesn't matter if the locks are leaky or not, because if they are not at all leaky and there's no water in the Cherwell, then all you're doing is starving the canal downstream of the locks. If they are very leaky, then the water flows into the canal and then out into the Cherwell, and what you are doing is starving the canal of water above the locks. So all the leaky locks do under those circumstances. I'm going to turn around and go back because I think I haven't obviously listened to this because I'm currently recording it, but I suspect I may even need to voice this over because it may be windy as hell. We'll see. Anyway, all you're doing with leaky locks is changing where in the canal is short of water. In this instance, there are other places where leaky locks absolutely do make a difference, but it's not all of them, and it's not even most of them. Let's give you another example. The locks, which actually are not particularly leaky because they've just been repaired at Long Buckby. Long Buckby, if the leaky locks are leaking there, then what that requires is for the water to be pumped back up to the top of the locks. And in fact, at the bottom of the Stoke Bruin locks, there's the same thing again, where the River Tove flows into the canal on one side and flows out on the other. And again, there is a pump house which pumps water back up to the top of the locks. Now, whether that's the most efficient use of water is another question, but it's the system that's been in place at those two places for the last 100 and 200 years respectively. So, it's the system that we have. Another source of concern is leakage from the canal in general. So there are various places in the canal system, well, all over the place, tiny little leaks exist. And there are various places where there have been smaller or larger breaches. We can leave the Bridgewater Canal out of this. There was a huge major breach there, but A, it's not part of the CRT system, and B, that is a relatively rare occurrence. But there are smaller breaches all over the system. And absolutely, if you've got a breach, you're losing water from the system. And that is perfectly true where they are. But there's plenty of places in the canal system where there aren't any major breaches, and they are also still closed. So, the major loss of water from the canal system is not something the CRT can do anything at all about, and that is hot weather causes a loss of water to evaporate. And you can't do anything about that except wait for the weather to get cooler. So as the weather gets cooler, we will see fewer and fewer losses from the canals, and we will see the canal system start to recover. But that doesn't give us a lot of hope for next year's hot summer. So, in terms of recovery this year, the CRT basically just has to wait and see. In terms of recovery next year, there are things that it can do. So let's go on to a third destination in this video and discuss what the CRT can do long term to minimise the problems of drought and water shortage. Well, here we are at Braunston Top Lock for, I guess, what you'd call the conclusion. Can I just say, by the way, that in order to get here, I actually went and asked the lady whose house it is whether she minded if I parked to do this video, and told her how long I was going to be and so on. And she was, very kindly said yes, but if she had said no, that would have been completely fine, and I would have had to have parked somewhere else and do it somewhere else. I think that's quite important that people know that manners do still exist in 2025. Now, I guess this is the conclusions part of the video. We know what the problem is. We know what the CRT have done about it immediately to try and alleviate the situation. So what should they do next? Well, firstly, the problem wasn't helped by a set of circumstances involving lots of reservoirs being lower than they should have been in the first place. So I guess, the first thing is to accelerate the works in the reservoirs, which I think they are doing, and make sure that in the next rainy season they fill up adequately to deal with problems like this. The second thing they can do is not going to be popular with hire boat companies, certainly, and that is to keep the system closed until well into the rainy season. If they open the system as soon as they possibly can do, then of course the first thing that happens is a million boats will go through it and empty all the water out again. So I guess, you know, some time to try and calm the system down would be helpful. And then, well, I guess the third thing that they can do is go and look at the leaky lock gates that exist and deal with them as they arise. It's not all lock gates, and it may not be the leaky lock gate near you, may not have any bearing on the situation. So I'm going to guess with limited funding, it's going to have to be a sort of targeted intervention. Certainly not these Braunston locks; these are not leaking at all. But I guess the fourth and final thing that the CRT can do is all about funding, isn't it? This all comes down to, can they spend the money to get everything back up to scratch? And, you know, so long as the government have decided that they're going to make efficiency savings by dint of, you know, pretending that you can fund the canals for less than you can, then that's going to be very difficult. They're going to have to try and get more funds from somewhere else. But if nothing else, then more money from the government, you know, it's simply going to have to be the case, or we're going to lose canals. So what can you do about it? Well, you can write to your MP. You can make it known to your MP that the funding of the canals is directly affecting lots and lots of people's mental health and well-being, as I talked about a video or so ago. You can volunteer. You just give a few hours. There's lots of very unglamorous volunteer work, you know, clearing vegetation, picking up litter and so on, which makes the canals nicer and makes more people able to use them, and therefore raises the standing of the canals in the public consciousness. You can donate money to the CRT. Now, you know, it's easy for me to say, isn't it? Everyone's got a spare couple of million quid stuffed down the back of the sofa, haven't they? But, you know, you could maybe consider them the legacy or whatever. That's what I've chosen to do. Not that it'll make much difference. I've got sod all money as it is. But most of all, whenever the opportunity arises, you can make the case to anyone that will listen that these canals are amazing, brilliant places for everyone, not just for boaters, and make the case that they are a huge part of our national heritage, and make the case that they are well worth saving. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy these videos, please do like and subscribe, and I shall see you guys all another time. Goodbye.